you are doing your master's in technically an MTB sort of thesis field, correct?
Yeah, so just to kind of and obviously thank you for having me on. Just to kind of let everyone know maybe a little bit more about where I'm at and obviously where it came from. So, like Andrew said, currently doing my Masters of Science degree in Sports and Performance Coaching. I do come from a very traditional strength and conditioning background, British weightlifting background, CrossFit background. Prior to that, obviously ex-military, but where I'm hoping to sort of shoot for next will hopefully be a PhD, and this is where kind of like my master's research, this is where it all kind of begins for me, is right here. I want to really understand more about the demands of the gravity disciplines such as downhill and enduro. It's just not well researched and not well documented at the moment. And like Andrew said, we've had some pretty amazing sort of conversations that we should have recorded, I think. And I always like questions, I like questions to kind of get my brain sort of thinking, but that's where I'm currently at, and hopefully I can spend this next year putting my master's research project together with the aim and intention of creating a coaching module for gravity disciplines such as downhill and enduro.
That's super interesting because I think we've got some fascinating minds that are passionate about mountain biking, downhill. But correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it's that well publicized. That information often stays between coach and athlete and then gets passed on from an athlete maybe to a little youngster that he's helping out. I can see myself doing that. But I mean, in other sports, you've got probably journals and books and just so much more information and correct information that's probably more certified, I guess, more structured.
Yeah, I think that's like I say, I've been coaching MTB athletes for a while now, probably going on five years at the moment. And one of the sort of things that stuck out to me was as a strength and conditioning coach, particularly if you're aligned with like a national governing body, so like the UK SCA, which is here in the UK, I can access the archives and journals. So if I'm working with a rugby player or a golf player or someone from football or tennis, I can kind of access this huge library of, research and studies done on particular exercises, programs, structure. And then that allows me to deliver this, high performance coaching that we all want to deliver, and also to ensure the athlete is doing the correct thing. But when it comes to downhill and enduro, it's kind of like there's nothing there. And there are a few studies done. There was one done from Edinburgh Napier University. I think one was done in Spain, and maybe another done in America that I could find, like only 3 or 4 genuine studies. And even then, they weren't anything, spectacular. I mean, but most of them are old as well. So a lot of the modern sort of technologies that we have available now, they probably didn't have access to back then. So it kind of makes it hard to decide how are we going to train downhill and MTB athletes. And I guess right now a lot of coaches just coach of what they believe. I mean, which is great. Some people are doing some great things, some people are doing some poor things. That's just the way the world is. But to have no genuine understanding of the demands of the sport, to literally have nothing there, to have no research to really understand what the athlete is going through in something like downhill or enduro is beyond me at this point. So I'm hopefully going to take that among myself and try and put something together that hopefully a lot of coaches, athletes, teams can hopefully use, moving forward. That's the whole aim of the game of what I'm trying to do here.
So the aim, if I understand correctly, is try to get some more scientific, concrete data that is then maybe, as they say, often like peer reviewed and accepted. Because now, like you say, I've worked with some coaches doing incredible work, and we did lactic acid tests after runs. Like, we're trying to use the scientific data, but no one's gone out of their way for the greater good of the industry potentially to try to say, cool, let's really try and get some, like, this is what scientific facts are for what the sort of challenges are of the sport and maybe what we could learn from that. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah. So in order to getting something published is actually a pretty big task. It's not a small task. So the study has to kind of go through a whole process where it's validated. So for instance, if you wanted to use a particular exercise, that has to be validated. If you want to use a particular structure, it has to be validated. The actual model in which you choose to coach on has to be validated. And then it would go forward to like a board, usually from one of the universities, and then they would have to sign off on it and say, yeah, we're happy for you to conduct this research. Then you'd have to conduct the research, ensuring that everything is, ticked off by the book. Then it has to be put out for, peer-to-peer review. And if you're lucky and everything goes well, you'll eventually end up with a published research project that is then validated, essentially. And then you can, at that point, you could then say, yep, doing this particular exercise at this particular point in the training program is validated. Look, here's the research. Let's do it because we know it works. Whereas, like I say, right now, we're kind of just guessing. And I think that's the whole thing that I can't really get my head around. I really do struggle to get my head around this idea that we're essentially coaching blind. There is no roadmap. There is no real understanding. And I'm obviously, once again, I'm pretty sure we'll get into it and please try to rein me back when I get a bit too carried away, because I do have a tendency to do that. But what I mean by we have no real understanding, it's not just about strength. There are physiological components, there are psychological components, there are environmental components that will affect how well an athlete can perform. And then you have to break each one of those, factors down and analyze each one of them. So it's not just a case of saying, well, the athlete's not strong enough, or having more strength enables an athlete to control the bike better. We don't actually know if that's true or not. And once again, we can say, well, in regards to strength training or resistance training, if a person is stronger, they're less likely to be injured. Well, once again, no, we don't. We don't actually know that if a person is stronger, that they are less likely to be injured. We can say that there's a good chance that in terms of resistance training and its injury prevention sort of methods, that's correct. But essentially what we're saying there is, if a person does a decent amount of resistance training or even a little bit of resistance training, they're less likely to injure themselves in training, not necessarily in the sport that they do. Hence why rugby players, albeit very strong, very powerful people, still get injured. It's not there to prevent injury from their sport. It's to prevent injury more from a training standpoint. So once again, there's this whole multifaceted approach to developing, athletes to compete in a high performance environment. It's not just, one singular thing or a couple of little things.